Hi everyone, a warm welcome to today's webinar, which is an interview with Angella Nazarian. And this is part of the program for our University Mental Health Week and Breaking Barriers Refugee Week. We will talk to Angella about her family's flight from Iran to the USA and how we can develop resilience and create an environment that supports our well-being and growth during challenging times. I'm joined today by my co-host and colleague, Pascale Roussel, and also by our distinguished guest, Angella Nazarian, who is an acclaimed author and international speaker based in Los Angeles. So the format for today's webinar is that I'll introduce them in a bit more detail in a bit. Then we'll go into the interview with Angella. Then we'll take questions from you as our attendees. So feel free to post your questions in the Q&A function. And then we'll have a reading of a poem that's been written by Angella, and then it's goodbye. So that is the format for today, okay? So let me first of all introduce you to my lovely colleague, Pascale. She's been working in the university since 2014, and she's been heavily involved in developing the University of Sanctuary Initiative and supporting refugees and asylum seekers since the university started offering scholarships for pre-sessional English programs in October 2017. And she has been also coordinating the organization of the university's annual Refugee Week, Breaking Barriers, since its launch in 2018. So Pascale will be helping to take questions from you, and she'll be reading out the questions for Angella to answer later on. And then we come to Angella. So Angella Nazarian is our special guest. She's the best-selling author of Life as a Visitor, Pioneers of the Possible, Celebrating Visionary Women of the World, Visionary Women and Creative Couples, Collaborations that Changed History. So that's the most recent book. She was Professor of Psychology at Mount St. Mary's University, California State University, and Los Angeles Valley College for 11 years. Angella is also the co-founder and CFO of Visionary Women, a non-profit organization that brings together some of the most dynamic thought leaders in America. This week and next week, Visionary Women is running an online International Women's Summit. And Angella's been very kind to extend the invitation to our student community. So if you go to the website, the International Women's website, you'll find the link on how to join that summit. Okay, so very warm welcome to Angella indeed. So I have been reading about Angella's life through this book, which I mentioned earlier, Life as a Visitor. It's been a fascinating book, and I couldn't put it down because I was following her journey from Iran when she was a child to her journey to America. And I want her to share her story today, or at least snippets of the story. And we can ask her a bit more about her life, okay, and her memories. So Angella, tell us about your life in Iran. What was it like when you were younger?
Oh, first of all, I want to thank you both for having me for this talk. For me, I wanted to accept this invitation, especially because we're speaking to students. I always feel that I'm an eternal student, and we rely on this generation to go forth and create societies and communities that are both healthy in mind and fiscal and economic sense. And I'm happy to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. It's really interesting because when you were talking about Pascale and her work, she deals with a lot of people who are refugees and asylum seekers, and that is exactly how I came to the United States. The first 11 years of my life, I lived in Iran. Iran at the time was a bustling Middle Eastern country that was very westernized in its capital, Tehran. I remember when I was young. First of all, I went to a bilingual school, so I learned English, and we had an English headmaster. So I remember at the time Farrah Fawcett and Lee Majors and all these movie stars, Elizabeth Taylor came to Iran because it was such a fascinating country and very progressive. I happen to be Jewish, and in Iran, there's a small minority of Jewish population that either came during, 1,000 years ago during Babylonian rule, or they came after the Spanish Inquisition. But strangely enough, the Jewish population was the biggest in the Middle East. I think I was very sheltered in my young life. I'm the last of 5 children, and my parents, I had older brothers and sisters that 2 of them were studying in the States, 1 was in Germany. So my parents were very internationally minded. When the revolution started happening, my father, who was much older, as a matter of fact, because I was the youngest child, had lived through many uprisings. Believe it or not, he had seen the Bolshevik invasion in Iran. So he never thought anything would really happen to our country. So when things got really bad, what he asked was for me, my sister, and my mom to come to the United States for a couple of weeks during winter break to see my 2 older brothers, and then we'll come back. So as strange as it may be, my experience was that I had 1 luggage with some clothes, and I left everything behind, thinking that we'll come back in two weeks, and we never went back. And so there's an interesting relationship I have to saying goodbyes, things ending, because I really didn't see half my family after that. Certainly I have very few pictures from my childhood, very few items from my childhood. And what really happened was that after the 2 weeks, when things got worse, my parents felt that they now needed to support 5 kids in the States because everybody decided to move. And how were they going to be doing that? So they went back to Iran to liquidate some assets so we have some funds to live off of. And so that became an ordeal where from age 11 to 16 and a half, I didn't see my parents. So for 5.5 years, I lived with my older siblings while trying to adjust to a new country, new language, new friends, new school. And I think a lot of people may also identify with this. Sometimes when you're in the midst of a challenge, you're not really thinking about anything but just the next day and how you're going to deal with things. And then much later in life, you come upon those experiences where you need to process those things. So that in a nutshell, it was my experience in Iran and the quick transition to the United States where I was practically thrown into a new culture.
Yeah. Talk us through the day. I think it was when you were probably about 11 years old and you just turned 11 and you went to the airport with your mum, and it was quite a chaotic scene, wasn't it?
It was really quite crazy, for an 11-year-old. I knew that things were happening in the streets. We actually were on lockdown, military lockdown, for a month or 2 before that. And once we went into the airport, I mean, it was a scene where people were literally pushing each other, masses of people trying to get through. We were very scared that we won't get through. I mean, my mom tried to bring a few pieces of jewelry and was hiding it and was scared that they're going to stop her, or she gave some to me. Funny enough, I don't know what happened. So it was my first overseas travel. So we go from Iran to London to take a connection to the United States, and we missed our London flight.
Right, my goodness.
We missed our London connection, and then we had to go to a hotel that evening, and we were so scared that they're going to call us back and say, you have to go back to Iran.
Goodness, yeah.
Yeah, so It is, you know, these are the things that I think when you think about it, is that how some experiences in your childhood carry over well into your adulthood when you're faced with similar experiences but not similar, and how you certain feelings bubble up. So in Life as a Visitor, I talked about different circumstances in my adulthood where certain images, certain experiences suddenly trigger something in you that make you feel like that smaller child experiencing things.
Mm. So when you arrived in America, were you excited? How did you feel?
I was actually very excited. I mean, as a younger child, I always wanted to be with my older siblings. So that was one. And it's interesting because I had this idea of what the United States was like through all the TV programs that I would watch. And then I was in Los Angeles, going to a supermarket and you run into like an actress or somebody that you've watched like on the other side of the earth through a TV.
And you see them for real.
Yeah, so it's very interesting because you have this idea and then you feel like you dropped into another world. I was very excited. As a matter of fact, my parents asked me if I would want to go back to Iran with them or stay with my siblings. And I chose to stay because I felt that, what am I going to do? I'd rather be with my siblings. I knew even back then that the opportunities that would be afforded to me here in the States would be much greater than my country of origin, as much as I love my homeland. And so it was a lot of excitement. And then once the excitement wore off, it's trying to acculturate and get used to ways of doing things. And I also noticed how, in some ways, even my bilingual education wasn't enough to carry me through my history classes and social studies classes and all that. So, and also just finding myself in between two worlds, how I wanted to carry on some of my traditional values with me, and then being faced with Western values that were different, and how I was going to integrate those things in one life, in my home life.
I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling, being caught between two cultures. So yeah, we can relate to that. So language wasn't really the issue, isn't it? In that case, it was more of the cultural change. So how did you acclimatize?
Well, I think one of the things that happened, language was a little bit of a problem, not really as much. I mean, I think one of the things that I decided to do, and I think it's been a pattern for me, what really sustained me were the friendships that I had. I feel that I've been very lucky that I have chosen people throughout my life that have been a great source of support. So the friends that I picked were very welcoming to me. I remember in Iran, nobody would have sleepovers. I mean, I went to a first sleepover birthday. They were so nice and inclusive. And that doesn't mean that everybody was, but at least I was able to find friends whom I've actually stayed close throughout my life with them, and they carried me forward. And especially, I think, during adolescence and later adulthood, friendships are very, very important. Just to cite something that's very close to mental health, is that they say that you're the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So if you really think about that, I mean, that is one nugget that I want everyone to take away. If we are the sum average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with, who are those people that we spend time with? Are we discerning enough to choose people who have a positive, acclamation towards life, that are giving, who are generous, who are supportive, who are trying to encourage your growth? Because one of the things that you see in a lot of relationships is that some people may even outgrow their past friendships, but because of loyalty may stay in it. But it's not a good relationship where, you know, they're suppressing their feelings, they can't be open enough, or they're not being heard or listened to. And so I was really lucky that I felt like those friends were the bridge for me to get a bearing on who I wanted to be. And they all had really strong values. So that was really helpful.
So they got you through, they helped you to be more resilient in acclimatizing?
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of times, so, you know, it's interesting because when I moved here, then I was a minority, right? And I felt oftentimes very different than everybody else. I was able to, I had two sets of friends. I mean, I had some Iranian friends, of course, and then some American, but I felt that I could be vulnerable with them, that I could say that, oh, you know, today at school, somebody was, you know, making, you know, eyes at me or saying that, you know, I was an Arab woman or something like that. And I do think that one thing I also took away from that, past this first or second year of my move, is that I then started thinking that people should be respected and admired based on their own merit. So it's not where you come from or anything, but it's how you're acting towards people and how you relate to or towards other people. And I think that we need to self-reliance and a changing of your own perspective on how you relate to people has a lot to do with how people also relate back to you.
That is true. So it sounds like connections are really important for mental well-being, especially in challenging times like now. What other tips would you give to people who are feeling, you know, that they're finding it really hard to face the challenges right now, uncertainty, all of that? What tips would you give?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because I think it's such an important question. I'm going to talk about 7 keys to resilience. But before saying that, I want to talk about what suddenly this year has been. It's something that we're all going to remember because it is a part of history. You know, most of us, you know, I do know of an elderly woman who lived through World War I, World War II, was part of the Holocaust. I mean, the kinds of things that they lived through, people who were born after 1960s have never had that experience. So our framework for what a life should be is so different than those before us. So I think that we are living through very, very special times, and this year has been difficult on everybody. I can't imagine that people have been saying that they've been thriving in this kind of environment, especially because when your activities are limited, you no longer have what you were doing with people, you can't even socialize with people. I mean, you now see how much strength and energy we derive from our one-to-one personal relationships or doing things with our friends or family. That connection is being lost. And then also being home and feeling less distracted. So what happens usually is that, you know, a lot of unresolved things, a lot of thought patterns bubble up, which gives you the opportunity, honestly, to take a microscope or take a magnifying glass and start thinking about, what are your thought patterns? What comes to your mind when you're alone? What kind of things do you talk? What is your self-talk? These are the things that we need to be very aware of. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go through 7 key points to resilience, and we can talk about it a little bit. Number one thing that if you really look through people through history, and I've done so much research on leadership, and one of my favorite things to do is read biographies. So I've probably read over 300 or 400 biographies of successful people, which I do recommend to people, because I think oftentimes we are looking for mentors, and mentors are not like sitting right next to you. So you have to seek them out, right? And sometimes you can seek them out through books. It's the easiest thing to do because it could be a great source of inspiration, and you see how they dealt with challenges. But you'll see that most people who weathered very, very difficult times had a sense of purpose in their lives. So their goal was an overarching kind of outline for their life, so that they knew that the short-term suffering or negative feelings they were having is just a little puzzle in the grander piece of what they're doing. So having a long-term goal, just think about yourself. If you want to run a marathon, every day you have to go into training. Every day you have to push yourself to do something that you don't like doing. The road to success, the road to well-being is a little bit of discipline to push yourself forward, but also doing gritty work. Grit and doing gritty work is a part of life. And if anyone tells you it's not.
Yeah. So even if someone doesn't feel like it, not motivated, you know, feeling a bit lost.
Yes. So that kind of goal, and I think that sometimes the way I personally like to motivate myself is that, you know, that we all have days that we don't want to do what we want to do, you know, that we have to do. But using visual cues, like imagining yourself doing something really great, or thinking, after this, I'm going to feel so much better. So you push yourself through it is very important. I also felt that in that kind of goal setting, for example, when I have been grieving when my father passed away or things of that sort, it was really important for me not to be completely self-concerned. Think that, you know, this feeling, it'll pass. But how much, if you concentrate on other people and giving to other people, can make you feel better and not be in your own head all the time. I think sometimes we run the risk of becoming too focused on our own lives, too focused in our own happiness, that we forget that part of happiness is not being focused on yourself. Truly.
Yeah, that is true.
Part of happiness.
One of the keys to well-being is actually to give, isn't it? So, yeah.
So I felt that, you know, the 1 year that was especially difficult in terms of grieving for me, that's when I actually said, this is a time I have to immerse myself in something to give back. And so, you know, somehow instinctively, when you're looking at the suffering of others and you're looking at things, you're just thinking, oh, I'm just a little, you know, I'm just one person in this world, and this world has so many complexities and so many things, and it really readjusts your own way of dealing with your challenges. So number two, it's really important to challenge assumptions. That while we are going through things, we're going to have certain values and thought patterns, and we need to almost think of ourselves as if we're observing ourselves and challenge those assumptions. So consider other perspectives. Like, can you consider a perspective that's different than yours and have more flexibility towards it, or have a better understanding of another person's point of view? Sometimes challenging assumptions is, you know, I've dealt when I was teaching at the university, and students would come to my office hours and they would say, well, you know, I've never been good at science. I've never been good at numbers. I used to sometimes teach statistics and research. And I said, who told you that? Like, can you tell me how you came to that conclusion? Sometimes we confine ourselves so much that we don't give ourselves the ability to push and try new things and figure out how we can expand our identity. If it's the one thing that I say is our life's work, is to be more of who we are. But first you have to take out all these things that you put around yourself in terms of limitations, and think about ways that you can expand yourself every year through growth, through trying new things.
Do you think the limitations are sometimes put on us by other people, maybe teachers in the past or our parents or our peers perhaps?
100%. So there's been research that they have shown in school settings, for example, if you're very young, teachers already really group you like, oh, this kid is good at this, and they kind of express that to the child so they have those values. Or in a family where a lot of them are doctors, maybe they feel like, oh, I have to pursue being a doctor because that's what is expected of me. So we need to uncover this. I remember when I was young, I do have a great many doctors in our family. And for me, I knew that I knew I was smart. I actually didn't know I was smart back in Iran because the teachers were so strict that it took me a while when I came to the US and I was getting the top grades. I said, wait a second, I can't be I can't be that bad. I'm pretty good. So once I came to challenging that assumption, for me, then it was, well, if I am smart, then I have to become a doctor. Because that was the gradient for me. And honestly, that never interested me. But I grappled with it for many, many years. For 3 years, I think I grappled with it until I came to the realization that if you're really good at artists are brilliant. Dancers are brilliant. Chefs are brilliant. It's just not doctors, architects, everything. If you can find a source of excellence in what you do, that shows your brilliance. So
we don't need a world where everybody's a doctor or an architect. We need diversity in the world, I'm sure.
And not only that, I do think that we need to also discuss what is our idea of success. We need to challenge that assumption. What does success look to you? And I just did this recently with one of my friends who has a very, very important job. And I said, what is your idea of success? And if we also wrap our identity too much into a job or anything, we're bound to get a little disappointed.
I agree. Totally agree with that.
So then we want to go into the third point, which is cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility means, are you ready to accept reality or resist it?
Okay,
Yeah, so one of the things that I always think about, and I monitor myself, I truly do, is that, I think of, it's not about how you conserve time or how, time is a limited resource, but it's really your energy. How do you conserve energy? And if you really think about how much of your emotional energy, your own energy, you put into resisting what is. If you're constantly resisting what is, you're not getting on with the fact that if you're accepting reality and saying, now I have to deal with it whichever way I can, it's much easier. So
pragmatic, isn't it?
Yes.
Approach. Yeah. I guess you lose a lot of time as well resisting, don't you?
Yes, I think that we spend a lot of our cognitive and mental functions and emotional functions to say, if this were different, I would do that. Well, it's not different. Okay, so let's deal with it as is. And how will you adjust yourself to that is? And it's a very difficult thing. But I'm saying that as long as we have it in our awareness, we can kind of monitor where we're going into this self-talk or patterns that are very repetitive that don't get us anywhere.
So do you need help with that process, or can anyone do it on their own?
I think some people can do it on their own, but I always felt, for around 8 years, I led women's groups. And that's what we would do. You know, I actually think that group work on this is very interesting, because when you're in a group and you speak about these thought patterns, or your own habitual ways of doing things, certain things that a person shares in a group triggers your understanding of what you do. And then what we did in our group, which for 7 years, 20 women came to me every week, and we went through all these, key things, is that you held each other accountable. And somebody could say, Sally, I see that you say this a lot in class, in your group. Have you ever considered changing that? So having a supportive group that helps you go through change makes it a lot easier. So I don't know if your universities have groups like that, but I do think even if you form your own small group of friends that say, once in a while we want to check in with each other and not talk about just what we did, but how are we dealing with life issues, you go a step deeper. You really start accessing things that you usually don't deal with on a daily basis.
Oh, we lost the connection there for a little bit. Now we're back.
So I was saying that I hope that universities have these kinds of group settings.
Some workshops.
Okay, that's great. I think it's always nice to have a partner or a few partners in your growth. And other people sometimes can give you very honest and, of course, loving feedback on how to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So challenging assumptions and our thought patterns. What are other tips that you can share, Angela?
Acting despite fear. And I think that is also very important. And I think that the only way to grow is to do things that you're uncomfortable with. So I remember when I was a professor of psychology, and for the first time I was thinking about, I was taking writing classes, and I was thinking about submitting a poem for publication. And I actually showed it to the teacher, and he's like, I like your poem, but I don't think it's going to get accepted. And I went home and I was really distraught. And then I thought to myself, well, what's the worst that could happen? I hear a no. I think I can deal with a no. It's okay. I can deal with a hurt ego. I'm going to submit it. And believe it or not, that poem won the contest. So I always say that think about all the things that you won't experience if you don't try it. If you don't push yourself past that state of fear and try to experience new things. I always think that if you challenge yourself through fear and say, what is the worst thing that would happen if you try something new? If it's a rejection, can you deal with a rejection? If you can deal with a rejection, try it. You never know. It was the same thing with publishing my first book. I mean, the odds of publishing a book is very low. And I thought to myself, well, I'll try it. If it doesn't happen, that's okay, because I love the process. And okay, sure, I may be disappointed, but I did something that was really worthwhile with my time. So you will, I've written 2 books on women's leadership and Nobel Prize winners and Pritzker Prize winning architects. And that's the first thing they say, is that they were always frightened doing something that had not been done before, but they did it anyway. So that becomes really important. So I'll go to tip number 5, which is emotion regulation. So what I mean by emotion regulation is that we have the power to interpret the situation around us. So that doesn't mean that you always have to be in a happy state or a loving state. Anger, disappointment, grief, all of those things are part of our natural response to life. It's not saying that don't feel those things, but after you feel them, it's important for you to start shifting and saying, how can I use this as a meaningful experience to grow? So, for example, with the lockdown, which has been so difficult, and some people don't even see an end in sight, which I hope very soon we will, is that, okay, we can say we're tired, we can say we're feeling very dejected and disappointed, but now, given the situation, we've accepted reality. How can we shift our perspective on this? Maybe using this as a way of saying, oh, I'll have the time to read all the books that I never got to read. Oh, this gives me a chance to connect to people in a different way, come up with different ways of connecting with people. We need to kind of reassess the way we're feeling, so looking at the situation so we can shift our own response to the situation. I hope that makes sense. Pascale, does it make sense?
Yes, it does, Angela. Thanks. I think we've lost Audrey.
Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry to hear that. And then also, while I'm talking about emotion regulation, I think it's very important to witness what kind of thought patterns you always put yourself into. People, no matter what, sometimes it's about resisting things, sometimes it's about negative self-talk, putting yourself down. All of those things lead to you always having an emotional tone which is less than what you truly deserve. And then number 6 is a feeling of agency. And a feeling of agency means that we all at some point, even if there's a situation that we can't change, we have the ability to change something in our lives. And that feeling of agency is very important. Research has found that people who find themselves in a helpless state that can't control anything in their lives often are depressed and very anxious. So the first thing is to find areas in your life that you have control over, that you can do something about. And that feeling of agency will lead you to a better emotional tone. So always think about ways that you can have power over a situation, over your feelings, or how can you shift things in a way. So that becomes important. And finally, we really started talking about this, which was social support. Social support is one of the key touchstones of well-being, that we need to nurture our connections to people more than ever, especially because we're so engrossed in technology, in our work. Everything has become so much faster. But social support is so important. So try to connect with people that you feel can give you support, that give you good energy back, that you can give good energy back to them. It's really uplifting if you sometimes, even, writing books requires you to be alone for long periods of time. And I can manage very well being all by myself. But I've realized that the times that I step out of that and I spend an hour with someone and, grab a tea with them or talk on the phone with them, suddenly I have shifted my thought patterns. I've shifted something within me and I feel more energized to go ahead and do what I was doing before. So that becomes really important. And finally, those were the 7 key elements. But for those people who feel anxious or also not feeling like themselves, spending time in nature is so healing. So being a part of a, activity where you're hiking, you're walking, an exercise program, and being around nature emits a certain kind of healing energy that makes people, we were born to be in nature. We have been wired to be in nature. This is our wiring. And we're so far removed from it that I think that we need to always unplug and plug ourselves into nature and come back into our cities and our rooms and do what we're doing.
Really good tips. Thanks, Angela. I can see that we've got a number of questions. So Pascale, do you want to read out a couple of the questions for Angela?
I think, yes, I'm unmuted. Yes, we have a couple of questions. So the first question is from Alice, who says, but isn't the society that leads us to think that success is based on the social position and income provided by your job? How can we escape that idea / social construct if it is surrounding us every day?
Well, it does surround us every day. It does surround us. I absolutely agree. I think you're 100% right. And I think the only way, you can't escape it. You live in that environment, that through advertising, through social structures, we see that. I think the only way that we can live through it is having an internal compass, and that we don't fall into that trap. And when we have that kind of internal compass, we need to be also very choosy around who our partner in life will be, so that at least our partners and our friends have the same kind of values as we do. We can never control what society will do, but we can say, because this is an important assumption for me, that success is about a whole other host of things. It's about the kind of relationships I have. It's about how I feel every day about my life. I mean, aren't we just running around and working so that we could say we're happy? So what is happiness? How do you define happiness? If you're going to be miserable all day long, so are you really happy? Have you defined, is that your success? The other thing is, I think society has also given us a construct of happiness. That society thinks that if you have this and this and this, it's so material based that we say, if we have all of this, that means we're happy. Or what does happiness look like? Does happiness really look like always like being at a party? And I mean, my happiest states have been like swimming in the ocean, or something so simple. I don't think it's been anything. So, I think that we have to take responsibility in saying, I don't want that garbage in, because garbage in is garbage out. I hope that kind of.
I think that's a very good point, Angela. And I think something we've learned from lockdown is that the simple things are actually probably the most important ones. So we've got another question from Parang, who says, when you write your story, are you able to deliver the whole concept you wish to deliver? Or do you shape your message in the way that your Western audience is able to understand in terms of cultural difference?
Oh, what a good question. I've never had that question asked. I think it's really interesting, because as a writer, you want to write things that you feel is authentic to yourself. So that's really important. First, you need to write what's authentic to yourself, because if you're starting to write with an audience in mind, you kind of feel astray. But then the whole idea of then going back and editing it, you want to make sure that the message that you're giving is understood by other people as well. So it's a really good question. I don't think that I began writing for anything but myself. That's exactly what I have to say. I wrote because I really felt that this is something that I wanted to express. And then through the editing process, there were things that I would want to shape so that the message was more clear. Sometimes you need a week or a month away from what you've written so you can read it again and say, am I doing a good job of expressing it? I don't think that I've ever shaped my message towards Western or Eastern, but I try to say this is truth, and truth has no culture. Truth is not culture specific.
Thank you. So we have another question from Matt, Do you have a criteria or framework for choosing the best people to adopt as your support group? Are there distinct features you look for in the 5 people you spend the most time with? P.S. Really great tips. Thank you.
I love this question. Yes, I do have a criteria. I really do. And I'm very proud of that. And everybody should feel, and I'm constantly honing it. That doesn't mean that I've always been judged people correctly from the start. But the point is that once you get more information, then you need to act on it. I think one of the things that I always look at is people's emotional tone. So what I mean by that is emotional tone is when you sit next to a person, forget about what they're saying. Forget about what they're saying. When you sit next to that person, do you feel good sitting next to that person? Are they giving you a feeling that you're accepted, that you're okay? You know, we all judge, but we want to also be around people that are not too tied up in judging other people. Because the people that judge the most are also most judgmental towards themselves. Everything internal is also reflected external. And I think that is one thing. You know, if I'm sitting there, I oftentimes catch myself, I'm like, am I enjoying this conversation? When I talk to this person, do I feel heard, or is it about them all the time? So these are the things that I talk about, but also I gravitate towards people who have a strong feeling of agency and responsibility. So that whatever is going on, they're not blaming the outside world all the time. For me, that's a red flag. If somebody's constantly blaming this and that and that and that for their unhappiness, I think all of those may exist, but we always have to come to the point of saying, well, I don't like this, but what am I going to do about it? And if a person has that, it doesn't matter if they're upset or sad. Sadness is part of life, but your feeling of agency and how you feel you can move past it is much more empowering to me than anything else. And kindness. I think kindness is very important. Do you have people who are kind to you, that you feel supported? And if you don't, change your friends.
I like that.
Such an excellent point. We have a final question. When did you know you wanted to shift your environment or your life? What was your trigger?
Oh, that's great. It's so good. And, you know, for me, I got this much later in life. So I'm so glad that people, you know, in their 20s at times are thinking about this. I think I came from a very, very traditional family structure. And, you know, Middle Eastern countries, usually women, especially if they have resources, or if you don't need to work, you're not supposed to work. And, you know, you're supposed to be tending to the family, which is very important to me. Value-wise, I think family is one of the most important things for me. But at the same time, I wanted to work, right? So for me, in my 20s, when I got married very young, I had my kids young. Meanwhile, while I was working and getting my graduate degree, and I was a part-time professor while I was raising my kids. And I knew that that was something very odd for a lot of people in my culture, thinking, why is she doing this when she doesn't need to? I mean, why does she work so hard? And for me, slowly, after teaching at the university, I just felt like I wanted to shake things up. And I think, you know, most of us have to realize that people go through 7 career changes in their lifetime. That's a big thing. So we pivot. It doesn't mean that you go from a doctor to a lawyer. I mean, you pivot with your career. I'm still using all the things that I used as a psychologist in my present work, but I pivoted in a very big way. And I think right at the end of my 30s, I said, I want to have a nonprofit. I want to speak around the world. I want to write books, like very ambitious things that also require a lot of, time and work. But I simply felt like if I weren't able to do that, I wouldn't be happy with myself. And people were thinking, oh my God, you're 38, your kids are like in middle school now. Why are you doing that? But again, it's about defining what happiness is. And for me, happiness is doing something worthwhile, having a long-term goal. For me, a sense of purpose is really important. I like to wake up in the morning. I love vacations, but I like to wake up in the morning and feeling like I'm touching lives. I'm having some sort of impact in the world. And I want to have a feeling like, 20 years from now, I can look back and feel proud of the way I conducted myself.
I can totally relate to that, Angela. Thank you. So I think, Audrey, that's time for a little reading before we close this event.
Absolutely. So Angela, will you do us the honor of sharing one of your works, so one of your poems from Worlds Apart?
Yes, of course. I'm going to reach down to get my book. And I think this part of the poem that I've been asked to read, and let me get my reading glasses, was also touching on how no matter where you are in your life, you always carry all the ages that you were before in your adulthood. I mean, one of my favorite authors is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And he always said that, whatever age I am, I'm carrying every age in this adult present self, which is really important. And I think it's a big psychological wisdom there. Okay, so this is from the chapter Worlds Apart. It grew dark at last, even silent. I leaned out the window. The streets were empty. 3 nights without the moon, and here I stand looking at the night sky. Trees rustled in the wind, a warning of the coming storm. That night, as I leaned out the window, listening to the rustling of the wind, a moment experienced worlds apart resurfaced in the same space of time. That night, as I listened to the rustling of the winds and watched the milky smear in the moonless sky, I wondered if these were the stars that hovered over me in Iran when I was 11. As a young girl, head upturned, brimming with dreams of faraway lands, with turmoil and rebellion pulsing in the air. I thought I'd come so far, yet we were still me and the stars and all that exists between us.
That's beautiful. I think that's a beautiful note to end this webinar on. And I would like to thank Angela for her time, because she's so kindly given of her time freely to our university and sharing her valuable insights. So real deep thanks on behalf of the University of Leicester for taking part and encouraging our student and staff community today. I know you're very busy today because you've got the International Women's Summit. So we encourage also our students to check out the link on the web pages and to take part in Angela's summit as well. So thank you and take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.